The golden age of piracy was a pivotal moment in history, shaping global commerce and culture. It was an era marked by swashbuckling adventurers, brutal sea battles, and cunning smugglers who forged their own codes of conduct. The untold stories of these pirates will transport you to a world of high-stakes adventure and transformation where the lines between heroism and villainy were forever blurred. In the late 17th century, the Caribbean Sea was a vast, untamed expanse of turquoise waters, coral reefs, and sun-scorched islands, where the rhythms of trade and commerce were about to be disrupted by a new breed of marauders. The era of colonization had created a network of bustling ports from Jamaica to Barbados, and the Spanish Main, a term used to describe the Caribbean coast of South America, was a hub of mercantile activity. As European powers such as Britain, France, and Spain vied for control of the region, their naval presence and fortifications were concentrated in strategic locations, leaving smaller islands and coastal towns vulnerable to attack. It was amidst this backdrop of colonial expansion and maritime competition that piracy began to flourish. The seeds of piracy had been sown earlier, during the 16th century, when privateers, licensed by their respective governments to attack enemy ships, had roamed the Caribbean. These privateers, often operating in a gray area between legitimate warfare and outright banditry, had developed a culture of independence and cunning that would later become hallmarks of piracy. As the privateer system began to decline, many of these sailors and soldiers turned to piracy, applying their skills and knowledge to plunder ships and amass wealth. One of the key factors contributing to the rise of piracy was the aftermath of the Anglo-Spanish War, which had ended in 1670. The Treaty of Madrid, signed in that year, had brought a measure of peace between Britain and Spain, but it also led to a surge in unemployment among sailors and soldiers who had previously been engaged in privateering or naval warfare. Many of these men, accustomed to the thrill of battle and the promise of riches, found themselves without a steady income or a sense of purpose. It was this combustible mix of skilled manpower, economic hardship, and the lure of easy wealth that created a fertile ground for piracy to take root. The island of Tortuga, located off the coast of Hispaniola, would become one of the earliest pirate havens. This small rocky outcropping with its natural harbor and strategic location was an ideal base for pirates seeking to attack Spanish ships and colonies. The island's governor, Jeremiah Higgins, a former privateer himself, had turned a blind eye to the presence of pirates, recognizing the economic benefits they brought to the local economy. As Tortuga became a pirate stronghold, its reputation as a den of thieves and cutthroats spread throughout the Caribbean, attracting like-minded individuals from all corners of the region. In the early 1670s, one of the most notorious pirates of the era, Henry Morgan, was making a name for himself in the Caribbean. A Welshman by birth, Morgan had arrived in Jamaica as a young man and quickly established himself as a skilled sailor and soldier. He would later become famous for his raids on Spanish colonies, particularly Panama, which he sacked in 1671. Morgan's exploits were often romanticized, and he was seen by many as a heroic figure, a champion of English interests against the hated Spanish. However, his actions were also marked by brutality and cunning, setting a precedent for the ruthless tactics that would become characteristic of piracy during the Golden Age. As Henry Morgan's exploits continued to captivate the Caribbean, another figure emerged to challenge his notoriety, Jean Laffite, a French pirate who would eventually become one of the most infamous buccaneers of the Golden Age. Although Laffite's rise to prominence occurred later, in the early 18th century, his story is deeply intertwined with the evolving landscape of piracy during this period. However, before Laffite's ascendance, the late 1670s and early 1680s saw a proliferation of pirate activity, with numerous smaller islands and coastal towns becoming hotbeds of maritime banditry. One such location was the island of New Providence in the Bahamas, which would eventually supplant Tortuga as a major pirate haven. In 1670, the English had established a colony on New Providence, but the island's remote location and lack of effective governance made it an attractive destination for pirates seeking to evade authorities. The island's harbor, with its narrow entrance and protected anchorage, provided a safe haven for pirate ships, while the surrounding waters offered abundant opportunities for hunting and fishing. As piracy continued to spread throughout the Caribbean, The English, French, and Spanish colonial powers began to take notice of the growing threat. In response, they increased their naval presence in the region, deploying more warships and establishing new fortifications to protect their colonies and trade routes. However, these efforts were often hindered by corruption, inefficiency, and a lack of coordination between different colonial administrations. Meanwhile, the pirates themselves were becoming increasingly organized, with many operating under a loose network of alliances and codes of conduct. One such code, known as the Pirates' Code, was said to have been devised by Henry Morgan himself, although its exact origins remain unclear. This code, which governed aspects of pirate life such as plunder distribution, shipboard discipline, and conflict resolution, helped to establish a sense of order and stability within pirate communities. The Pirates' Code also reflected the social and economic realities of pirate life, which was often marked by a rough egalitarianism and an emphasis on shared risk and reward. Pirates typically operated on a system of democracy, with decisions made through a process of consensus building and voting. This democratic ethos was reflected in the way that pirates divided their spoils, with the captain and other senior officers receiving a larger share, but the majority of the plunder being distributed equally among the crew. As the golden age of piracy entered its second decade, the Caribbean was becoming an increasingly complex and dynamic environment with multiple colonial powers, pirate factions, and indigenous populations interacting and competing for resources and influence. In 1680, the English colonial administration in Jamaica, led by Governor Thomas Modiford, launched a series of campaigns against pirate strongholds in the Caribbean, targeting locations such as Tortuga and New Providence. These efforts were motivated by a desire to protect English trade and colonies, as well as to assert the authority of the colonial government over the lawless pirates who had come to dominate the region. However, Modiford's campaigns were hindered by his own ambiguous relationship with the pirates, whom he had previously tolerated and even encouraged in their raids against Spanish targets. This ambivalence reflected the complex web of alliances and rivalries that existed between different colonial powers and pirate factions, as well as the often blurred lines between legitimate trade and piracy. As the English naval presence in the Caribbean increased, many pirates began to seek out new havens and hunting grounds further afield from the main colonial centers. Some turned their attention to the Spanish Main, where they preyed on unsuspecting merchant vessels and raided coastal towns. Others ventured into the Atlantic, targeting ships bound for or from European ports. One such pirate was George Rayner, an Englishman who had begun his career as a privateer but later turned to piracy. Rayner's exploits took him from the Caribbean to the coast of West Africa, where he targeted slave ships and other merchant vessels. His story, like that of many other pirates, reflects the global reach and diversity of pirate activity during this period, as well as the complex networks of trade and commerce that underpinned the golden age of piracy. As the 1680s progressed, the English naval presence in the Caribbean continued to grow, with more warships and experienced commanders being deployed to the region. One such commander was Sir William Stapleton, who served as the governor of the Leeward Islands from 1672 to 1685. Stapleton played a crucial role in shaping English policy towards piracy, often walking a fine line between tolerating pirate activity and cracking down on it. He recognized that pirates could be useful allies against Spanish and French targets, but also understood the need to maintain order and protect legitimate trade. In 1682, Stapleton launched a campaign against the pirate haven of New Providence in the Bahamas, which had become a major hub for pirate activity. The English naval forces successfully captured the island and forced many pirates to flee or surrender. However, this victory was short-lived, as the pirates soon regrouped and began to operate from other locations, such as the island of Madagascar off the coast of East Africa. Meanwhile, the French colonial powers were also taking steps to combat piracy in the Caribbean. In 1683, the French governor of Martinique, Charles de Courbon, launched a series of attacks against pirate strongholds on the island of Tortuga, which had long been a thorn in the side of French colonizers. The French efforts were initially successful, but the pirates eventually adapted and found new ways to evade capture. As the pirate threat continued to evolve, the English, French and Spanish colonial powers began to develop more sophisticated strategies for combating it. One key innovation was the use of pirate hunters, experienced naval commanders who specialized in tracking down and capturing pirate vessels. One notable example was Captain Robert Maynard, an English naval officer who would later become famous for his role in hunting down and killing the notorious pirate Blackbeard. In the early 1680s, Maynard was serving as a junior officer in the English Navy, but he quickly gained a reputation as a skilled and fearless commander. In 1683, he was given command of a small squadron of ships tasked with patrolling the Caribbean and hunting down pirates. Over the next several years, Maynard would play a key role in shaping English policy towards piracy, using his experience and expertise to inform the development of more effective anti-piracy strategies. In 1685, the English monarchy underwent a significant change with the accession of King James II, who would go on to play a major role in shaping English policy towards piracy. James II was a staunch supporter of the English colonial enterprise, and he recognized the need to protect legitimate trade and commerce from the pirate threat. However, he also faced significant challenges, including the ongoing conflict with France and the growing power of the pirate factions in the Caribbean. As King James II began to assert his authority over the English colonies, he appointed a new governor of Jamaica, Sir Thomas Lynch, who would play a crucial role in shaping English policy towards piracy. Lynch was an experienced colonial administrator who had previously served as the governor of Virginia, and he brought a deep understanding of the complexities of colonial politics to his new role. Over the next several years, Lynch would work closely with Captain Robert Maynard and other naval commanders to develop more effective strategies for combating piracy in the Caribbean. One key challenge facing Lynch and Maynard was the growing power of the pirate factions, which were becoming increasingly organized and sophisticated. In 1686, a group of pirates led by the notorious Captain Jean Laffite launched a series of attacks against English and French targets in the Caribbean. Laffite's exploits would become legendary, and he would go on to become one of the most feared and respected pirates of his time. As Jean Laffite's exploits gained notoriety, he became a thorn in the side of colonial authorities who struggled to maintain order in the Caribbean. In 1687, Governor Sir Thomas Lynch of Jamaica launched a campaign to eradicate piracy in the region, targeting Laffite's operations in particular. Lynch worked closely with Captain Robert Maynard, who had gained valuable experience hunting down pirates in the previous years. Together, they developed a strategy to disrupt Laffite's supply chains and gather intelligence on his movements. One of the key challenges facing Lynch and Maynard was the pirates' ability to blend in with legitimate traders and sailors. Laffite had established a network of allies and informants throughout the Caribbean, allowing him to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. To counter this, the English authorities began to offer rewards for information, leading to the capture or killing of pirates. This tactic proved effective, as several pirates were caught or turned in by their former comrades. In 1688, Laffite launched a series of daring raids against English and French shipping, targeting valuable cargo such as sugar, tobacco, and textiles. His most notable exploit was the capture of a French slaver, which he then used to transport African slaves to the pirate haven of Madagascar. This move not only demonstrated Laffite's cunning, but also highlighted the complex web of relationships between pirates, slave traders, and colonial authorities. In 1689, the English Navy established a dedicated pirate hunting squadron, commanded by Captain Maynard. This squadron was tasked with patrolling the Caribbean and hunting down pirate vessels, using a combination of intelligence gathering, naval power, and diplomatic pressure to disrupt pirate operations. In 1690, the French governor of Martinique, Charles de Courbon, launched a series of attacks against pirate strongholds on the island of Tortuga. De Courbon's campaign highlighted the challenges faced by colonial authorities in combating piracy, as the pirates seemed to always find ways to regroup and reorganize. In 1691, Captain Robert Maynard was tasked with leading an expedition to the pirate haven of Madagascar, where Laffite and his comrades had established a base of operations. Maynard's mission was to gather intelligence on the pirates' activities, disrupt their supply chains, and capture or kill key pirate leaders. The expedition would prove to be a pivotal moment in the history of piracy in the Caribbean, as Maynard and his men faced off against some of the most notorious pirates of the age. As Captain Robert Maynard's expedition approached the pirate haven of Madagascar, he encountered a complex web of alliances and rivalries between various pirate factions. The island had become a hub for pirates, with many establishing bases of operation and trading posts. He began by establishing contact with local traders and informants, who provided valuable information about the pirates' movements and operations. One of the most significant pirate factions operating in Madagascar was led by Adam Baldridge, an English pirate who had established a trading post on the island. Baldridge's operation was a crucial supply chain for many pirates, providing them with food, ammunition, and other essential goods. Maynard recognized that disrupting Baldridge's operation would be a significant blow to the pirate community, and he began to make plans to attack the trading post. In 1692, Maynard led a raid on Baldridge's trading post, capturing several pirate ships and seizing large quantities of goods. The raid was a significant success, but it also alerted other pirate factions to Maynard's presence in the region. Jean Laffite, who had been operating in the Caribbean, began to make his way to Madagascar, seeking to establish an alliance with other pirate factions and counter the English threat. As Laffite arrived in Madagascar, he found that the pirate community was fragmented and disorganized. Many pirates were operating independently, and there was little coordination or cooperation between different factions. Laffite recognized an opportunity to unite the pirates under his leadership and began to establish alliances with other pirate captains. He also started to build a fleet of ships, using his charisma and tactical genius to attract new recruits and establish himself as a major player in the pirate world. Meanwhile, Maynard continued to patrol the waters around Madagascar, seeking to disrupt pirate operations and capture key leaders. In 1693, he encountered a pirate ship commanded by William Kidd, a Scottish pirate who had been operating in the Indian Ocean. Kidd's ship, the Adventure Galley, was heavily armed and crewed by a mix of pirates and privateers. Maynard engaged Kidd's ship in battle, but the pirate captain escaped, fleeing to the island of Mohili, where he established a new base of operations. In 1694, the English Navy established a dedicated pirate hunting squadron in the Indian Ocean, commanded by Captain Thomas Warren. The squadron was tasked with patrolling the waters around Madagascar and disrupting pirate operations. Warren's efforts were complemented by those of the French and Spanish, who also increased their naval presence in the region. The increased naval presence had a significant impact on pirate operations, forcing many to abandon their bases in Madagascar and seek new havens elsewhere. Jean Laffite, however, remained determined to establish a pirate empire in the Indian Ocean. He continued to build his fleet and expand his operations, seeking to exploit the weaknesses of the colonial powers and establish himself as the dominant pirate force in the region. His most notable exploit was the capture of a French East Indiaman, which he then used to transport goods and establish trade relationships with other pirate factions. As Laffite's pirate empire continued to expand, he began to establish trade relationships with other pirate factions and local merchants. One such merchant was a man named Abraham Samuel, a Jewish trader who had established a network of trading posts throughout the Indian Ocean. Samuel's trading posts provided Laffite with access to valuable goods such as spices, textiles, and precious metals, which he could then use to trade with other pirates or sell on the black market. In 1696, Laffite formed an alliance with another prominent pirate captain, Henry Every, who had been operating in the Red Sea. Every's ship, the Fancy, was one of the most feared pirate vessels in the Indian Ocean, and his crew was known for their brutality and cunning. Together, Laffite and Every launched a series of raids against English and French shipping, targeting valuable cargo such as gold, silver, and precious gems. One of their most notable exploits was the capture of the Ganges Sawai, a treasure ship owned by the Grand Mughal of India. The ship was carrying a vast treasure of gold, silver, and precious gems, which Laffite and Every divided among their crews. The capture of the Ganges Sawai was a significant blow to the English and French colonial powers, who had been seeking to establish trade relationships with the Mughal Empire. The success of Laffite and Every's alliance attracted the attention of other pirate captains, who began to seek out alliances with them. One such captain was Thomas Tell, an English pirate who had been operating in the Caribbean. Two had heard of Laffite's successes in the Indian Ocean and sought to establish a partnership with him. In 1697, Tew arrived in Madagascar, where he met with Laffite and Evry. The three pirates formed a powerful alliance, which they used to launch a series of raids against English and French shipping. They targeted valuable cargo, such as spices, textiles, and precious metals, which they could then use to trade with other pirates or sell on the black market. Their alliance was so successful that it attracted the attention of the English and French colonial powers, who began to take steps to counter their activities. In 1698, the English East India Company established a pirate hunting squadron in the Indian Ocean, which was tasked with capturing or killing Laffite, Evry, and Tew. The squadron was commanded by Captain Thomas Warren, who had been tasked with disrupting pirate operations in the region. The increased naval presence made it more difficult for Laffite and his allies to operate, but they continued to find ways to evade capture. They established a network of spies and informants throughout the Indian Ocean, which provided them with valuable information about the movements of English and French ships. They also developed a system of codes and signals, which allowed them to communicate with each other without being detected. Despite these challenges, Laffite's pirate empire continued to thrive. He established trade relationships with local merchants and pirate factions, which provided him with access to valuable goods and information. He also continued to launch raids against English and French shipping, targeting valuable cargo such as gold, silver, and precious gems. His successes made him one of the most feared and respected pirates in the Indian Ocean, and his name became synonymous with piracy and adventure. In 1699, Laffite launched a series of raids against English and French shipping in the Red Sea. His raids were so successful that they attracted the attention of the Ottoman Empire, which began to take steps to counter his activities. The Ottomans established a pirate hunting squadron in the Red Sea, which was tasked with capturing or killing Laffite and his crew. Kemal's efforts were complemented by those of the English and French, who also increased their naval presence in the Red Sea. He established a network of spies and informants throughout the Red Sea, which provided him with valuable information about the movements of Ottoman, English, and French ships. He also developed a system of codes and signals, which allowed him to communicate with his crew without being detected. In 1700, Laffite's pirate empire reached its peak. His raids against Ottoman, English, and French shipping were so successful that they attracted the attention of colonial powers from around the world. However, Laffite's success was not without its challenges. The increased naval presence in the Indian Ocean and Red Sea made it more difficult for him to operate, and he began to face opposition from other pirate captains who were jealous of his successes. He also faced challenges from within his own crew, as some of his men began to question his leadership and demand a greater share of the spoils. Despite these challenges, Laffite remained one of the most feared and respected pirates in the Indian Ocean and Red Sea. His name became synonymous with piracy and adventure, and his exploits were celebrated in stories and songs throughout the region. As the 18th century dawned, the golden age of piracy began to wane. The increased naval presence in the Indian Ocean and Red Sea, combined with the efforts of colonial powers to suppress piracy, made it increasingly difficult for pirates like Laffite to operate. In 1702, the British East India Company launched a series of expeditions against pirate strongholds in the Indian Ocean, targeting ports and anchorages used by pirates. The company's ships, armed with heavy cannons and crewed by experienced sailors, proved more than a match for the pirate vessels they encountered. One notable example of this was the expedition led by Captain Thomas Warren, who commanded a squadron of East India Company ships tasked with suppressing piracy in the Indian Ocean. In 1703, Warren's squadron sailed into the harbor of Madagascar's Santa Maria Island, a notorious pirate haven, and engaged a fleet of pirate ships. The pirates, outnumbered and outgunned, were quickly defeated, and many of their leaders were either killed or captured. The expedition marked a significant turning point in the campaign against piracy, as it demonstrated the effectiveness of concerted naval action against pirate strongholds. As the British and other colonial powers continued to crack down on piracy, many pirates began to retire or seek alternative livelihoods. Some, like the infamous pirate captain Henry Every, disappeared into obscurity, their fates unknown. Others, like Laffite, attempted to adapt to the changing circumstances by forming alliances with local leaders or seeking pardons from colonial authorities. However, these efforts were often unsuccessful, and many pirates found themselves facing imprisonment, execution, or forced labor. In 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht marked a significant shift in the balance of power in the Indian Ocean and Red Sea. The treaty, signed by Britain, France, Spain, and other European powers, established new trade agreements and borders which further restricted the opportunities for pirates to operate. The treaty also led to an increase in naval patrols and cooperation between colonial powers, making it even more difficult for pirates to evade capture. As the golden age of piracy drew to a close, its legacy continued to shape the maritime world. The period had seen the emergence of new forms of piracy, such as the pirate rounds of the Indian Ocean, which would continue to influence maritime crime for centuries to come. The era had also witnessed significant advances in ship design, navigation, and tactics, many of which were adopted by naval powers and merchant fleets. In 1720, the British Royal Navy launched a major campaign against piracy in the Caribbean, targeting pirate strongholds in the Bahamas and Jamaica. The campaign, led by Admiral Francis Hosier, resulted in the capture or destruction of numerous pirate ships and the execution of many pirate leaders. The campaign marked the final nail in the coffin for the golden age of piracy, as it demonstrated the determination and capability of colonial powers to suppress maritime crime. By the mid-1720s, piracy had largely disappeared from the Indian Ocean and Red Sea, and the Caribbean was no longer a haven for pirates. Many former pirates had been executed, imprisoned, or forced into retirement, while others had adapted to new circumstances by forming legitimate trading companies or seeking employment as privateers or naval officers. The golden age of piracy had come to an end, leaving behind a legacy of adventure, brutality, and transformation that would continue to shape the maritime world for centuries to come. As the golden age of piracy faded into the annals of history, its legacy continued to reverberate across the globe, shaping the course of maritime trade, naval power, and international relations. The era's impact can still be felt today, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity, cunning, and brutality. The pirates of old may have sailed into the sunset, but their stories, exploits, and consequences remain an integral part of our shared heritage. Thank you for joining me throughout this historical journey. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.